On today's show, we're going to be talking about a interesting phenomena I have seen studying the left and the right. And what I've seen is almost a narrative switch. It's quite interesting. I have observed this, and you've observed this as well, David. The narrative has been borrowed from each other, but just who is who has been mixed and switched around. In the past, the old left narrative was the world is controlled by capitalists, and the socialist and the communist must rise up to overthrow the capitalist. But yet, what I've noticed in the right, they have a similar narrative, just in reverse. That the socialist and the communist already rule the world, and we, the people, the good capitalists, must overthrow the socialist and the communist. It's the same story, just the characters have been switched around. It's like reading Lord of the Rings. You have the humans and the elves fighting the vile orcs. But now it's like the orcs are being repressed by the elves and the humans. Or we have Star Wars, we have the rebellion fighting against the Imperials. But now it's the Imperials who are fighting against the rebels who fight unfairly. It's amazing, like this narrative, or even conspiracy, they use the same narrative. It's just the sides or who is who has been swapped around. Like it's such a similar narrative. It's just Team A has been swapped with Team B, and Team B has been swapped with Team A. How did this narrative swap happen? When did it happen? And is there a way to move beyond this in a peaceful way? Like how do we overcome this form of black and white thinking? Like, I remember when I attended a Green Party meeting years ago, and they were kind of questioning me about, my motives for being there. I use the narrative, regardless of someone's political background, they think they're right. No one says, I'm going to be the orc, you're going to be the noble elf. No, everyone thinks they're right. Everyone thinks they have good intentions. And like I say, I know people who are hardcore right-wingers. They love their families and they care about their communities. I've known people who are hardcore left-wingers. They love their families and they love their community. How do we get past this to make the other the villain, to make the other the enemy? Like, how do we overcome this?
You've laid that out very nicely. There's a book that was written recently by two scholars at Northwestern University. One is Gary Saul Morrison, and his colleague Shapiro. Shapiro's an economist. He's also the president of Northwestern University. Gary Saul Morrison is one of the world's leading scholars of Russian literature. And because he has studied Russian literature so carefully, that has brought him into, of course, the movement from 1870, when there was a liberal czar that finally ended serfdom in Russia. And it leads directly to 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution. And in this book, which is really worth reading, it's called Minds Wide Shut: How the New Fundamentalisms Divide Us. So the argument there, and it's an argument that I have made in the past as well, is that what you've described is really two forms of fundamentalism.
Go on.
A right-wing form of fundamentalism, political fundamentalism, and a left-wing form of political fundamentalism. So what's the characteristics of fundamentalism? Fundamentalism is characterized by three things. The first one is certainty. You are certain, as you described it, that you are right. And you're certain that your analysis is adequate. The second characteristic is what's called perspicacity. You have a simple way of describing this, which describes everything. capitalism is the root of all evil. Socialism is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
And the third characteristic is that you have some kind of document that you see as foundational and as truth. So for the capitalists, that is, oddly enough, most of them these days who are, I think, are political fundamentalists on the right. They don't read this, but they would claim it. It's John Stuart Mill or Adams, or some more modern people like the author of The Fountainhead. On the left, it's Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, maybe a little Trotsky thrown in once in a while. So what you described, I think, is what I often call codependent twins. I think certainly through my lifetime, I was born into the Cold War after the war. So the right and left tended to square off with each other in these very absolutistic terms. In more recent history, just when we look at liberal democratic societies now around the world, including our sister nation to the south, and we look at what is happening in social democratic countries, there is, and you described the switch very nicely, there's a real pushback against progressive politics.
Yep.
Why is that? Well, there can be good reasons for it. My sense is that all forms of political fundamentalism overreach.
Okay.
They all think they can do more than they can do, and they all tend to demonize the other. And they live off of demonizing each other because it makes good press. So they need each other. That's why I call them codependent twins. They need each other. But there's another insight here coming, I think really comes from Jesus Christ. At least that's where I root it. And it's this. Jesus Christ said, love your enemy as yourself. Sometimes theologians have thought this meant engage in heroic virtue. That's not what it means. It's a spiritual insight. It is saying, love those that you thought were your enemy. Because if you love them, they're no longer your enemy. If you don't love them, and they are your enemy, you will ingest them. You will ingest exactly what it is you hate in them. And I think what you described is exactly that. The left ingested what they hated in the right. The right ingested what they hated in the left. And they adopt the same stance and the same way of going about it, the same kind of strategies as a result. So I think underneath all of this is the great lesson, and certainly it's for those of us who work at being Christian, which is there is no room within the Christian vision for political party pre-associations. I'm not saying you can't belong to political parties. I am saying we know that you do not have certainty. We know that your perspicacity is an idolatry. We know that the texts you cite are too small. So, from my sense of the Christian tradition, a much deeper understanding of the Gospels, theology, and the spiritual life helps you hold lightly the political positions across these boundaries, and will help you pull what is useful from each side of it in order to make society more healthy.